to one of the top stories we're tracking for you, and that is the note of the President today indicating that they're looking at ways to support households as well as businesses when it comes to solar installation and other alternative forms of power devices. And let's talk more about this now with South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, or Sapvia spokesperson Frank Spencer. A very good evening to you, Frank. And before we get into those pronouncements made by the President earlier, his thoughts, or what he said in his closing Lekgotla speech earlier this evening, that there is a broad agreement amongst the NEC members to declare a state of disaster on energy. What are your thoughts on that, and is this something that could potentially tackle the crisis that we are facing as a country?
Oh, good evening, and thank you for having me on the show. I do think that this could be a positive step, depending on how it's implemented. If the state of disaster is used to speed up legitimately the procurement of additional generation on the grid, this could be exactly what we've needed to actually spur new kilowatt hours to come online, and particularly from solar, as solar is one of the fastest deployable measures of getting new generation and new energy on the grid. I do think the concern is, however, if this is used to fast track other procurement that perhaps isn't quite as beneficial. So I guess we'll have to see what the detail is when it comes out, whether this is ultimately for the good or for the bad.
And hopefully it wouldn't be, like you say, on procurement that wouldn't be sustainable, like a diesel, for example. But I suppose we'll have that conversation as it is declared, if it is. Now, back to his pronouncement around assisting households and businesses with solar or any other energy devices. How viable is government's idea to assist households and businesses in this regard?
So I think what is most exciting, as I mentioned, about this space is that the deployment of solar at all scales is one of the fastest way to get new generation on the grid. And what we have seen that this market, the residential, commercial and industrial solar PV market, is one of the fastest growing markets in South Africa at the moment. But there are many who don't have access to the resources to buy their own solar PV projects. So I think if government implements a subsidy in the correct way, this could enable householders, particularly poorer households, to access these sorts of energy services and perhaps even earn revenue from them.
So they are working on a plan, one would assume, because they say an announcement will be made in the coming weeks. What would you say this plan should look like in terms of being able to tackle those very issues that you just mentioned in your previous answer?
So I think the ideal would be to make available guarantees or finance to enable those who otherwise don't have access to finance to put solar on their roofs. I think those with bonds or access to loans from banks can already do this cost effectively. But I guess what I would love to see is the ability for small homeowners or RDP homeowners to be able to access finance to put a solar PV system on their roof, to use some of that electricity and to be able to export a quantity of that electricity to the grid, and through selling that extra electricity to the grid actually be able to pay off the solar PV system that they've been able to get financial support from.
Yeah, and in this regard, I suppose you could answer this in two parts. The fact that partnerships with organizations like yourselves and other related stakeholders is going to be very important. But as you answer that part of the question, the cost of this kind of intervention, do you find that government may be able to do this in an affordable manner, this assistance that they're wanting to offer?
So I think what is exciting about solar PV, as I mentioned, is it is one of the fastest way to put kilowatt hours on the grid, but also that energy is actually one of the most affordable ways already to produce electricity. So the more solar PV we can get built at the moment at all scales, from the small houses to the larger houses to the businesses to the large solar farms, if we can be building at all scales, then this can only be good for our electricity crisis.
Thank you very much for those insights. That is Sapvia spokesperson Frank Spencer joining us to weigh in on that potential state of disaster on the energy situation in the country, but also government's wish to assist households and small to medium businesses with solar and other forms or devices, energy devices that could alleviate the pain that has been caused by the blackouts. And that's